In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King and Russia's president agree on the urgency of resuming Middle East peace talks and urge a speedy political solution in Syria. Syrian refugees continue to pour into Jordan as fighting intensifies in Damascus and Aleppo. And Tunisian leaders begin the search for a new prime minister. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King is back home after talks in Moscow with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The two leaders discussed Jordanian-Russian ties, Syria, and efforts to kickstart the Palestinian-Israeli peace process to achieve the two-state solution. Hala Dababne has more.
Economic ties and regional developments were at the center of His Majesty the King's talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. In a one-on-one and expanded talks attended by top officials on both sides, the leaders also discussed the prospect of expanding military and technical cooperation, as well as boosting bilateral trade, investment, infrastructure, and transport ties. Talks also tackled change in the Arab world brought on by the Arab Spring, which His Majesty noted was a chance for Jordan to move steadily with its comprehensive reform drive. His Majesty said recently held parliamentary elections have been an integral part of the reform process, with parliamentary governments being its ultimate goal. King Abdullah said the opportunity should be seized to end the stalemate in the Middle East peace process before it's too late. The two leaders agreed on the urgency to resume Palestinian-Israeli negotiations on the basis of a two-state solution. Also on the agenda was Jerusalem and Jordan's efforts to preserve Muslim and Christian sites in the Holy City. On Syria, the two leaders urged a speedy political solution to the crisis to end the people's suffering and preserve the country's unity. His Majesty briefed on the influx of Syrian refugees to the kingdom and Jordan's efforts to host them.
I'm delighted to be back here in Moscow, and again, I remember with great fondness, as you said, your trip to Jordan last year in June. And again, I think the Russian pilgrim house on the Baptist site is of tremendous importance to all Jordanians and all Russians. And we're very pleased that you had the opportunity to visit that site. I'm very delighted with the warm relationship that both you and I have had for many, many years, and the very important and warm relationships between our two countries, as you have mentioned. And I hope that obviously with this visit we'll have the opportunity to discuss a lot of regional issues. One on the top of my mind obviously is the peace process, which I hope to solicit your advice on this evening's meetings, and also looking at opportunities how to improve our good economic relations. We're very interested on improving our economic accords, and we have some I think some serious discussions on certain issues that I hope to bring up today, which I think will bring us into a new level of coordination between our two countries on certain very important projects that I hope to share with you later in this meeting. So I'm very grateful for your support to the relationship between our two countries, and I look forward to a very fruitful discussion with you this evening, and a great pleasure to see you again, sir.
In welcoming remarks, the Russian leader noted that Jordanian-Russian ties have been growing, particularly in the fields of education and religious tourism.
Your Majesty, you are always welcome in Russia. It's a good opportunity to meet. Our two countries' relations are constructive and always evolving. We are pleased with that. Again, I'd like to thank Your Majesty for your gesture to designate a plot of land for Russian pilgrims on the banks of the Jordan River. As you know, more than 600 Jordanian students are currently studying in Russian universities, which prompt us to cooperate more closely in education. We are also in constant communication on the most important issues in the world arena.
The King and the Russian President expressed their keen interest to maintain coordination on various issues and serve the two countries' interests. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
His Majesty the King welcomed Cardinal Roberto Sara and other participants in a regional conference of Caritas in the Middle East, North Africa, which opened in Amman. The King stressed tolerance and cooperation as fundamental values for dialogue and understanding among followers of heavenly religions for the good of humanity. During the meeting with the religious figures attended by Royal Court Chief Faiz, the King congratulated Caritas on the 45th anniversary of its activities in Jordan, commending its humanitarian role led by Patriarch Fuad Atwal and its contributions to development and social services. The King also spoke about Jordan's efforts to provide aid to Syrian refugees in the kingdom in cooperation with international relief organizations, calling for concerted efforts by all parties to improve services to the displaced Syrians. The delegation thanked Jordan for the humanitarian services to Syrian refugees and praised the King's efforts to spread peace and tolerance. The regional conference of Caritas in the Middle East and North Africa kicked off at the guest house in Fhes, west of Amman. The gathering is chaired by Cardinal Sara, who explained a message signed by Pope Benedict XVI last year on the Church's service to humanity. Royal Court Chief Faiz Tarawne continued meeting with parliamentary blocs to select a prime minister. Tarawne met at Basman Palace with the 17-member Al-Mustaqbal bloc headed by Deputy Talal al-Sharif. Tarawne began the consultations on Monday, being tasked by His Majesty the King to lead the dialogue with lawmakers on the prime minister. Tarawne told the bloc reform is an ongoing process since the King assumed power, as the kingdom remains a voice of moderation in the region. He said a strong domestic front is a key pillar of national stability. Tarawne will see all the MPs, both blocs and independent lawmakers, for their insight on the next stage and the shape of the new government. Jordan continues to take in Syrian refugees, crossing in record numbers, with more than 4,000 coming in the last 24 hours. The border guard have led the effort to receive and transport the displaced people to the Zaatri refugee camp, whose population was swelled to over 110,000. We get more details with Farah Hajlouni.
No let up in an exodus of Syrians into Jordan, which has kept its border open to the refugees fleeing the conflict in their country. The Jordanian military have taken the lead in a humanitarian effort, securing a arrival of refugees and providing them with immediate assistance before being bused to refugee camps set up by the kingdom to shelter them. The daily average number of Syrian refugees has exceeded 2,000 since the start of the year, and over the past 2 years, the kingdom has received about 390,000 people. Among the new arrivals were children, women, and elderly people, plus many sick and wounded, taken care of by emergency medical crews at makeshift border points before being moved to medical and civilian hospitals. At the border area, bombing and fire exchanges can be heard almost every day. The Syrian refugees have to trudge several hours before they arrive at the border. For some fleeing refugees in the conflict, the road to the border is long and treacherous. Most refugees choose to cross at night to avoid being hit by gunfire, and many fled in a hurry without food or water and very little possession.
I have some parcels with me. There are some clothes in it. I have 8 children, 6 girls and 2 sons.
Nobody has money. It's unbearable. Except the money in my pocket, I have no more money.
As the number of displaced Syrians continues to grow, a refugee usually had to wait for several hours to get the authentication and registration completed at the temporary receiving center near the border. Every 2 hours, a bus would arrive and transport the registrant to the Zaatri refugee camp. Farah Hajlouni for the News at 10.
Russia and the Arab League see signs of hope that the rival sides in the Syrian civil war are willing to start talks to end nearly 2 years of conflict. In the Syrian capital, a missile struck the command center of the main Syrian rebel force, wounding its leader. A soccer player was also killed when a mortar bomb hit a stadium in the center of Damascus. Luay Balqar has more in this report.
Syrian rebels and government troops locked in combat in and around Damascus. The fighting has been going on for months, but saw a marked escalation in recent weeks. Shells targeted a French hospital in the capital, built 111 years ago, damaging its roof and windows, but there were no casualties. Shells also landed on Tishreen Stadium in central Baranka district, killing a footballer and injuring several others. The attack comes a day after two mortars landed near Tishreen Presidential Palace in the capital without reports of injuries. In Aleppo city, two large missiles, same time as Russian-made Scuds, struck empty homes and more than 20 buildings were destroyed, killing at least 20 people. Rebels say the Syrian government is turning to longer-range weapons in their attacks after losing bases in the country's second-largest city. As the conflict rages, Russia urged both the regime and rebels to swiftly halt the conflict, warning that seeking a military settlement risks leading to mutual destruction. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and visiting Arab League head Nabil al-Arabi said they were encouraged that both the Syrian government and the opposition had voiced readiness for dialogue.
In my understanding, the situation is currently changing, and it is very important that the readiness of the Syrian opposition for dialogue is met by a confirmation from the government. They are also ready for dialogue. The government has been talking about it for a long time, but now time has come to test the words by concrete actions.
Syrian Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim is due in Moscow next Monday, and Lavrov said the head of the Syrian opposition coalition, Muaz al-Khatib, would likely visit in March. Loy Balkar for the news at 10.
A Lebanese judge demanded the death penalty for ex-minister Michel Samaha and Syrian security chief Ali Mamlouk. They face charges of plotting attacks on political and religious figures in Lebanon. The military magistrate said Samaha and Mamlouk should be given the ultimate punishment for transporting explosives from Syria to Lebanon in an attempt to assassinate Lebanese political and religious leaders. The two men were first accused in August of planning the attacks along with a Syrian army colonel. Investigators said explosives were found in Samaha's car when he was arrested at his home on the 9th of August. Tunisian leaders began the search for a new prime minister to try to lead the North African nation out of its political crisis. Rashid Ghannouchi, head of the main Islamist Ennahda party, said the group had not named anyone to replace Prime Minister Hamadi Jabali, who resigned yesterday. But Ghannouchi expected a new government to emerge this week. Jabali quit after his plan for a political technocrat cabinet to prepare for elections failed. He had proposed it after the assassination of opposition leader Shukri Belaid on February 6 shocked the North African country and widened Islamist secular rifts. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu took a first step to form a new government. He said he signed a coalition deal with former Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni, who will serve as Justice Minister and handle efforts to renew stalled peace talks with the Palestinians. Netanyahu's choice of Livni, a moderate voice for a government led by his right-wing Likud party, seemed a positive signal ahead of U.S. President Barack Obama's visit next month in a push to resume the peace process. Livni said she had joined ranks with Netanyahu because of a strategic and moral imperative to leave no stone unturned to exhaust any possibility to become a part of any government that commits to bringing peace. Netanyahu said the union with Livni is an effort to provide a wide and stable government that unites the people to face down regional challenges.
A team of ministers will be established under my authority for the issue of the peace process and on the principles I laid out. I authorize Tzipi Livni to negotiate with Palestinians and, of course, to advance in the process. We need a Palestinian partner, and I hope we will find a Palestinian partner who will take seriously Israel's security needs and will be ready to end the conflict once and for all.
While Livni's appointment as negotiator seems to signal a new peace drive, it questions whether she would only be a fig leaf for Netanyahu, whose settlement expansion in the occupied West Bank has been a key factor in the stalemate. Palestinian reaction was reserved, with some officials saying they want to first see the final shape of the government Netanyahu is to put together. 10 people were killed in the crash of a fighter jet in a residential area of the capital. The pilot and 2 children were among the victims. 17 people living in the populated area were injured and several houses were damaged. Authorities said the black box of the crashed jet was found in the wreckage and an investigation was launched. The aircraft was on a training mission when it fell on a 3-story building near Sana'a University. Her Majesty Queen Rania Al Abdullah attended part of a national forum on making education relevant to the workplace for youth in Jordan. The forum is one of a number of UN-led consultations in the country on the shape of the post-2015 Global Development Agenda. The Queen attended a roundtable discussion on the second day of the February 19 to the 20th National Forum on Educational Relevance, sponsored by the UNESCO office in Amman. The forum meetings include 3 thematic groups on general education, teacher training and preparation, and education curricula, which came up with a preliminary summary of 5 key outcomes. Her Majesty stressed the need to support the aspirations of the youth and empower them to compete in the workplace regionally and globally. Anna Paulini, Director of UNESCO office in Amman, thanked the Queen and the attendees for helping to create this opportunity to bring education to the center of the post-2015 development agenda. The world of sports has not seen so much controversy since O.J. Simpson took to the court stands. South African Paralympic athlete Oscar Pistorius is being accused of shooting his girlfriend, law graduate and model Riva Steenkamp, at his home, an accusation he denies. South Africans who regard Pistorius as a role model have been gripped by the court case for the last 2 days. Double amputee Pistorius, known as the Blade Runner, broke down in tears as the prosecution presented their testimony. However, they had little sympathy for Pistorius and said he knew Steenkamp was in the bathroom when he fired his shots in cold blood. The bail hearing is expected to conclude by the end of the week. Over to sports and some NBA action. The Chicago Bulls came back from the All-Star break to end a 2-game skid by barely beating the New Orleans Hornets 98-97. The Bulls had the lead throughout the game, but didn't put the Hornets away until Lul Deng hit a jumper with less than a minute left in the game. Deng led the Bulls with 20 points, while Boozer had 17 points and 10 rebounds. Eric Gordon led the way for the Hornets with 20 points, and rookie Anthony Davis trailed behind with 15. The Bulls are currently 1 game behind the first-place Indiana Pacers in the Central Division.
Vasquez to Gordon, lifts a 3, got it. Gordon a 3 and a timeout taken by Tom Thibodeau.
Basketball to the world of speed and the Motor 2 in Spain. Aspar team rider Nico Terole was fastest on the first day of testing, followed by Simon Corsi and Julio Simone. The Spaniard set a lap time of 1 minute 53.8 seconds on his Sutter in the second session in Jerez, followed 0.1 seconds later by Italian rider Corsi. The first race is set to take place in Qatar on April 7th. And finally, to the weather outlook. It will continue to be chilly tonight with southwesterly moderate winds. A slight rise in temperature is expected tomorrow, so it will remain relatively warm in most areas and southeasterly moderate to brisk. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a relatively cold night, but fair tomorrow with northerly moderate to brisk winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. His Majesty the King as President agree on the urgency of resuming Middle East peace talks and urge a speedy political solution in Syria. Syrian refugees continue to pour into Jordan as fighting intensifies in Damascus and Aleppo. And Tunisian leaders begin the search for a new prime minister. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.